Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm once again joined by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp and the good old Nicolò Grasso as we review Leigh Whannell's Wolfman. If you've been following the podcast, you know that this is a topic we've talked about a lot. We just previewed Invisible Man. Back in our very first episode in 2020, we previewed what was then Ryan Gosling's Wolfman. We've been with this project in multiple variations and through multiple different hands, but finally the film is out and we're able to talk about if it lived up to our expectations after The Invisible Man, or if it was sadly a disappointment. Also join us after the Wolfman review as we pay our respects to the legendary David Lynch and discuss some of our favorite performances in his career. Thank you so much for listening to ClapperCast. It truly means a lot that you're joining us today. Now let's get to our review of Wolfman. Okay, I'm very excited for this episode. Just a little bit of history for anyone, a longtime Clapper viewer, if you remember. The very first episode of ClapperCast was about a lot of topics, and not all the topics we need to get into, but if you listen to it and you get through because I re-listened to it, a really interesting conversation on Tenet where every single person pronounces the movie differently, you will get to a conversation on then Ryan Gosling's The Wolfman. And I know everyone on that podcast, including you, Jack, were pretty skeptical, pretty negative about the prospects of this project. Obviously changed a lot since then. We talked about Invisible Man last week on the Patreon. We love that movie. We love what Leigh Whannell did with that film. Did the Wolfman, or just Wolfman, excuse me, hold up for you? Jack, I'll turn it over to you first because you started this conversation, 204 episodes ago? What were your thoughts finally seeing Wolfman?
Isn't it strange how the David Lynch thing is going to be even more poignant now, but how we're just running in circles on this podcast ourselves? Time is non-linear. How many years ago was that? 4 or 5 years ago now, where they were going to reboot the whole thing, and now we're here with a very different story. Look, The Invisible Man last week, I think we spoke about enough about Leigh Whannell. We spoke about a little bit of this briefly. Trepidation always comes into these things because you've got the Wolfman, the Joe Johnston one, not the Joe Dante one, the Joe Johnston one. You know, we've had loads of iterations of Dracula, Dracula Untold, Bram Stoker's Dracula, so on and so forth. This one's always been led slightly astray in the fact of not many people want to touch this, rather than the Invisible Man with the the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and stuff, and then you had the Van Helsing with Jekyll and Hyde, again Dracula and Frankenstein. But this one's always been put to the side. I've always found that quite strange because I've always got a big affection for Lon Chaney Jr. in that film. I think he plays a really poignant, casual Joe in that film. I think he has really great emotion there. I think he's a really physical actor. He's a John Goodman of his time, and go support those old films. At 1941, one of the latter pieces 10 years after the fact of the Universal Monster starts. But with this, trepidation begins to start show. We spoke about this again briefly last week. The Universal movie night things where the Wolfman premiered the official look at the Wolfman, which scared me shitless, and not in the way that it should do. The lack of release dates with we spoke about this missed the October date. Bear in mind, this started shooting in March last year, which is kind of a very quick turnaround, but it missed its October date. January never really gives great credentials for the horror genre, aside from the very bar minimum and Oscar bait stuff, so that was again another worry. And I think also the lack of projection of getting this out in town, showing this around, very strange. And because we mentioned this again in the last few weeks, but you mentioned Longlegs, Carson. I can't remember if it was last week or was it your Nosferatu episode, but I know you weren't massively into that. You've just watched Gretel and Hansel, which I'm going to leave. I cannot wait for you to get your opinion on that later. But let's concentrate. But the lack of showcasing iconography of that and allowing the viewer to form that, and the brilliance of the promotional material, and the same with Nosferatu of Count Orlok. They did a very similar thing where there's two very great iconographies there that they've allowed to maintain a level of hidden detail for the audience to find. This didn't feel like it was building to that. I don't know what really the whole idea with the promotional campaign was. That being said, sitting in an auditorium with 3 other people and not really wanting to go watch this is one of the very few things I was I don't know. Maybe okay. Let's go watch it. I'm pleasantly surprised with this. I'm be fine. I've read both your letterbox reviews. I'm probably a bit more on Carson than I am with Nick, but I'm very interested in how me and Carson are going to look at this because I know Nick, you're the other side, which I'm not going to. I'll let Nick speak for himself. But I'm more pleasantly surprised with this. This does not have the depth, and which was again we were worried about last week. It does not have the depth. It doesn't have the social commentary. It does not have the thematic strength of the Invisible Man. But I think that where this comes alive is I do quite like the diversity in subject. I do quite like the fact that it is tonally different. I do like the fact that it's a different design. I do like the fact that it's a Pacific Northwest folklore tale. I like that. I like that it's different. It doesn't take Lon Chaney Jr. It doesn't take the the Talbot story, and the Wolfman 2010, which are all like they stay their own lane, which is absolutely fine. This does feel different. I enjoyed this. I like the in-camera work that's all done um, in real time. I think there's an interesting differentiate how they go from story narrative to the other to this to the other. It is very repetitive in narrative. We're in the house, we're out the house, we're back in the house. I don't think they use the claustrophobia of the setting enough, which is like so fucking bizarre considering how well he did that in The Visible Man. I think the score is slightly jarring as well. It was so fucking loud, and then the image was so dark, and often occasion you couldn't really see the details and stuff. It's very predictable. Yes, that's the one of the first things I read on by the tabloids. Predictable, but I came away from this aside from its very like quick diluted finale. I enjoyed this what it was. I liked it's different. It is not the heights of the Invisible Man, but I liked it. It's different, and I think in a world of having 6 or 7 of the Wolfman things in the 40s, it being very quiet for a long time. Yeah, I mean, I'm shocked with the commercial and the critical analysis of this. I think it's very unfair. I think it's absolutely fine. Um, it's a decent time. I think if you want the horror fix, it's not too outlandish, but it sticks most of its landings. I think it's fine. I'll end on this. It was exactly what I thought it was going to be, and to that, I'm pleasantly surprised.
I know on the other side of the spectrum, Nick, you had some great facial reactions during that. What are your thoughts on Wolfman?
I loved it, Carso. Can't you tell? No, actually, like, funnily enough, I wasn't even originally supposed to be on this episode because the movie comes out a week later in Germany. And I was like, ah, damn, I'm gonna miss this one. I had other plans for tonight, but then those were moved. And then yesterday, I went like out of the blue. Hey, there's a 10:30 p.m. preview screening of a horror film. It's probably gonna be Wolfman. It was Wolfman. Compared to U2's experience, my screening was packed and everyone knew what they were getting themselves into, which made it more fun. Um, but I have to say, I found myself to be very underwhelmed by this film. I found it to be completely mediocre in almost every sense of the word. The biggest problem with this film, I think, is Leigh Whannell's career, previous filmography, just the expectations that come from that. Because I didn't love Upgrade, but I thought, okay, this has some interesting ideas, and especially the visual style of it. I loved how he choreographed and shot the fight scenes, attaching the camera, having it be controlled on the body, and blah blah blah. It was cool. Invisible Man, I loved. I think it was the last or second to last film I watched before the pandemic, and it was everything that I wanted, kind of like this reimagining of Candyman and other slasher films through the lens of domestic abuse and just and misogyny and just super interesting. I love what you guys talked about on your episode. We also discussed it a couple of years ago. I think it was on Anatomy of an Adaptation. But going into Wolfman, I was like, okay, knowing Leigh Whannell, having seen what he has done with Invisible Man, we are not going to get the Talbot story. We're not going to get like you said, Jack, rightfully so. Like I've always saw with Benicio del Toro and Lon Chaney, it's like no. He's going to go his own different direction. And one thing that really frustrated me is that on paper, which is not even just in terms of screen, just like oh, someone tells you about the movie on paper, it's very interesting. Oh, we have this family man. He moves back to his home where It was with his father in Oregon, this very complicated relationship that we'll talk about, and using this narrative to explore generational trauma, familial abuse, I think can work. I think, seeing a loved one turn into a monster, in this case, in a literal sense, I think is very effective. It's been done before as well. Um, but just to put it plainly, I didn't give two shits about the characters. It is shocking for someone who has made an entire career out of being primarily a screenwriter. It is shocking how poorly these characters are set up. Julia Garner's wife, journalist character, she is worthless. She has no character throughout the movie. Her characteristic is, I like my work. Okay, that's good. It's also trying to be this, more contemporary take. She's the breadwinner in the family, but they don't play with that element of regret. There's nothing like Anatomy of a Fall here in terms of relationship drama. Um, the main protagonist, played by Christopher Abbott, who I love. I think here is very great. He's very physical. I like this type of performance. I like that he goes all out every single time in any project he's in, and he delivers in that sense. But again, he's just like good father, overall good guy, just a little bit weird, had a very bad relationship with his father, and that's it. And he really, really loves his daughter, by the way. In case you don't get it after the first 20 minutes, he really loves his daughter, who's this super cute child. Um, but I was not expecting the movie to be kind of a siege film. You never feel any of the tension of, this family being haunted by this beast. Like, oh my god, this beast is attacking us. We have to hide in my husband's old house. Oh my god, the beast is outside. Like, you never feel that. Throughout the entire movie, it's like, oh, there's this freaking beast outside trying to get in, I guess. But it's doing nothing. It's absolutely doing nothing until the plot requires the beast to do something. It's lacking so much genuine tension, where literally the only moments I felt any sort of reaction and the crowd felt any sort of reaction was with the body horror. Which, as much as I love body horror, and I thought the effects here were amazing, it is the easiest way to get a reaction from people. Oh my god, gross! The fingernails? Oh my god. It does go into some gnarly parts that I really appreciated. I think that's when the movie comes to life. But otherwise, I was just bored. I was like, what's the point? We'll get to it. The final shot, I wanted to scream. I was like, what? You have not earned this type of bullshit shot to end the film on. What are you telling me? Leigh Whannell, just like he saw Candyman and he was like, I can reinvent this in a different way using an existing property. He watched The Fly by David Cronenberg and he said, I can reinvent this. And he absolutely missed the core of that film, which is the characters. I ended up from the screening, they had a little box with like, how much did you like the movie? And I put it on bad. It's like very bad, bad, okay. And I was like, bad. 2 stars. Carson, I need some positivity. I'm usually the positive one here, so I need you to bring up the charm and the energy in the room now.
I'll do my best. I was not I was not prepared for Wolfman. I thought this film, we talked about it last week with our Invisible Man episode. We kind of previewed this, and I thought I like Leigh Whannell, but I thought everything we saw about this film was a little bit troublesome, had me a little bit worried going in. I didn't go in with the highest expectations. And I've not been this torn on a film, I think, in a very long time. I can't remember the last time there was a movie like this where like half of it I love. Like I love, love, love half the choices here. And the other half are like a crime against cinema, to where like I don't know how to digest fully, because for every great thing there's something terrible, and for every terrible thing there's something great. I will say I love the filmmaking here. I don't necessarily love all the designs. Let's be clear. I think the wolf vision gets a little bit visually interesting, let's say. The actual creature design, I did not like really at all, I'll be really honest. But I thought the body horror was strong, like you mentioned, Nick. I thought the filmmaking, the cinematography, it was very dynamic. It took a lot of the visual language I found of Upgrade and kind of blended both his previous projects alongside this new element. But there's definitely traces here of Upgrade. There's definitely traces here of Invisible Man with how it plays around with space. I thought it was really strong with building tension. I disagree with you there, Nick. And I think there is it's a film that challenges your expectations both on what is the werewolf narrative going to lead to, and also what do you just like expect from this film. And its performances also, to where it takes a while to finally pick up on what it's going for. It obviously is talking about generational trauma. You could find stuff here about substance abuse and alcoholism, but really looking and reframing the werewolf narrative around a family member, or a father in this case, who gets sick and is withering away, and his family is watching him wither away, not in a sense to where he's necessarily even violent towards them, but he's just losing himself and losing his humanity. That all worked for me. I really like that conversation. Don't know if the film ever really hits the nail on the head, and there is a lot of bizarre choices in that conversation alone. But the part that really bothered me is like, especially Julie Garner's character is one of the worst written characters I think of all time in cinema. Not only is she the dumbest person alive, the plan she creates on how to get out of this situation is like mind-bogglingly insane, to where it's not even like fun dumb, it's just like purely dumb. But then also they've used her character to where a situation will play out, and they use her character to just bluntly explain it to the audience in a way that is super lazy and super unnatural. He, gets bitten, or he gets scratched by this wolf, this werewolf, and he's sitting there going in and out of consciousness, and she's like, well, I think he got infected with this disease, and I think this disease is contagious, and it's like transforming him. And it's like, that's a crazy thing to pick up from the situation, and that's just like lazy screenwriting. So it's weird. I think there's a lot here to appreciate. I think on a rewatch especially, I will appreciate this film definitely more than I do not appreciate it. I like that Leigh Whannell is bringing a style and a certain voice and a certain artistic choice to his films. I think he's a much more interesting filmmaker after this, but definitely far from being like perfect. It's really, I'm very torn on this.
Interesting. I don't even know where to continue from that. Like it's fascinating. I have to say, because I didn't really mention it, I really wish he leaned more into the transformation side of things. Actually, to even reiterate compared to what I said before, like I didn't know this movie would be kind of like this pseudo siege where the family is trapped inside a place and the beast is trying to get in, kind of. Um, but I really thought the movie would be the husband gets scratched, bitten, whatever, and then it's just him with the family. I think that dynamic could have been more interesting compared to just having the slow transformation, but then, he's also kind of a good beast. He's not really trying to attack the family, he's trying to defend them. A good father until the end. You know, there's so many just bizarre choices. I do wonder what the movie would have been like if, like in the previous iteration of it with Ryan Gosling attached, if it was going to be more of an adventure, more in the style of maybe the 2010 one, or because I genuinely can't see him in this film. And potentially maybe he dropped out because he actually did read the script and was like, I'm not feeling it, Chief. I don't know. Weird. I don't know, Jack, if you wanted to say something. So
No, I was just gonna say, it's difficult to where to start here because, again, in our preview, I think there's someone who told me that this was going to be a very much body horror centric feature. It's not going to have the social commentary as Invisible Man had. It's going to be very much like looking at that type of reactionary to that, and it was along those lines. I agree with you. It'd been interesting to see the first iteration of that screenplay, but it's interesting that Whannell, being a screenwriter, looks at that and was like, I want to do my own thing. I think to do that with a sense of ego, which is not a problem if you're going to put your name on it, you want it to be yours. I think you've got to have a little bit of courageousness to it, but I think you've also got to have a bit of security in that as well. And watching this, it's interesting when you read. It probably what hasn't helped here is we did the Invisible Man because we're going to compare the two, and for multitude of reasons, the Universal Monster stuff, the iconography, so on and so forth, the history. But I think one main attribute you have to compare the two is the main lead cast members. One is Elizabeth Moss, and then one is Julie Garner. Okay, and in both of the trades when these films have come out, he's made mention of how important. I think you said this most importantly, Carson, about Moss's portrayal in the former. Like it ultimately rests on that. Like she is extraordinary in that film, and she brings a level of reactionary involvement to that feature where you sort of like, again, I'm going to reiterate points here, but where you doubt if what she's seeing is like you're just so involved in it, but you're doubting stuff. But you're so engaged and engrossed into this character's sort of torment that you need everyone to believe. And she like even if the film played of those aspects, she drills this and she pulls you in so comfortably. She's absolutely frightening. But in the trades of in Wolfman, Whannell's made quite strange, not necessarily strange, but conscious conversation about how important it was to cast Garner or an actress of that capability, comparing it to Shelley Duvall in The Shining. Whereas without Duvall in The Shining, you don't have the reactionary investment and immersion of making Nicholson's character, the Torrance character, be as manipulative, as terrifying. Ultimately, the whole atmosphere and tension of that film rests on Duvall, which is true of The Shining's case. On paper, like you said, Nick, I agree with what he's trying to suggest with Julie Garner's character, but the execution of it, I will admit, I think is very much like, not only is it underwhelming, but it's not compelling at all. There are moments here where she's deadpan looking at like a reactionary character, and she will state a line as if it's table read, and then the camera lingers on just emptiness of her just staring at him. There's one scene where like stuff's starting to happen very slowly, and like there's snippets of it, like he carries something like a bookshelf, and it's like I noticed when I watched, like, that's odd. And then they're both staring at him, and it's this really cool little thing where like something's not quite right, but we carry on as normal. But like she just stares at him for what feels like 2 minutes, and she never says a word. And I don't know if that's the subtleness to sort of engage the subconscious and conscious of the audience and be like, right, this is going on too long. Something's not quite right, but the scene's playing out as normal. If that's the idea, I'm sorry to say, but the conviction's not very good. It's very poorly crafted, which is interesting compared to how he crafts set pieces and sequences. But I agree with you, Carson. Like there's bits where she's led astray to have a lot of the width and depth of it, that the emotional tolerance of this film ultimately on her shoulders, and she's very comatose, which is interesting because if you watch her in the Assistant, which is equally similar in the sense of there's a character as a third party, you don't really know what's going on. She's very reactionary. She's very stoic in that film. She's very silent. She's very much engaging through the eyes with physicality. Here, it's the same thing but played like almost one note, which is very surprising. And looking at Garner's repertoire of work and Whannell's, it's a strange thing that them two should come together and not really work as well. I agree with Nick. I think Christopher Abbott here is fantastic. I think there's very little depth aside from one note that he has a bad relationship with his dad. I wonder how that's going to come back into it. The sort of the lore of the Wolfman itself. You know, it's somewhat predictable, but there's an engagement there. There's a lack of. I mean, it could not be more on the nose of scars. You know, we don't want to leave scars on people, but you know, sometimes we don't mean to. It's like, well, a fucking Wolfman. Like, we know where we're going with this. Like, we're on a literal level, figurative level, metaphorical level. Like, yeah, I sort of get that. You know, the Invisible Man. You know, we played with that last week. It worked on that. Everything seems to be very much on the nose. Like there's very little substance here where we're allowed to infer, or where the audience are allowed to craft an idea or are invited to have a form of approach to the material, in a sense of we're just told and they're showcased. And I don't think that really helps this type of film. We have no real idea where this thing comes from. We have no real idea how it works. That all works for the beneficial of the narrative in the form of, well, it's unpredictable. But then if you're going to try attach a dynamic to that, make it compelling. Make it a little bit more fractious in the house. You know, like Nick said, the claustrophobia, it being a siege. Make it feel a bit more compelling that we don't know what the fuck this is. Because seemingly, if that was my wife or my husband with that, I'd be quite frightened. And I think the Julie Garner's character seems to be very much like, oh, something isn't quite right, but I'll just leave it here because I haven't got a good relationship with my daughter, and my relationship with my husband is not as. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I think we're wrestling with identities here and dynamics and arcs that are not really compelling to the central piece itself. But That's the only thing where I'm like, that doesn't quite get me. I mean, I know you both spoke about it, but it's the one thing where it rests so much on that character being reactionary to the material, especially in the final third. And I agree with Nick, it does not deserve that final piece with that blaring music as well. I'm like, are we not trying to have a moment here? Like the music blasting, and it's like we've had this really like poignant sequence, which okay, like it works, but it's predictable. And then we're going to this blaring um, finale, this music and this iconography. Like, why are we not having a very slow, intense but silent sequence of them just like taking in that yes, they're now scarred, but allow them to sort of like slowly accept that they've got this bond now together. No, it's like there's just things here where I'm like this, like Nick's, like Carson said. I think I'd be probably more. It would not be beneficial for me to have a second viewing of this. I think I'd look at far more larger issues here at whole. I think this feature on a whole, and this how pedantic Vita says, I think it needs a second run. I think there's a second edit here that is in desperate need of going back into the house, leaving, going back into walking past. Have a drink how many times these two fuckers walk past each other without saying anything, and I'm like, are you not screaming? Are you not screaming? Why isn't it like I don't know? There's such a lack of suspense and tension. I'll throw it to one of you two, but there's such a lack of urgency within this film, which feels like such a dissonance to the setting and the tone. I
Yeah.
don't know where that discrepancy lies. That must be the writing, surely.
Yeah, writing and editing, I would say. And I'll quickly add, because I was going crazy, and then I want to hear Carson's thought, but I was going crazy. Like you mentioned all those moments of just the staring at the thing, and there's one moment where Christopher Abbott is like goes to the door, and just like is looking at something, and he turns around and he speaks to his child, who just stares at him. He turns around, there's his wife, talks to her, she just stares at him, and that's when I thought, oh, he's starting to become the Wolfman. They don't understand him. He thinks he's speaking to them, but actually he's not. But that's not actually what's happening. It's very literal in that moment. Because then when you go later on, that's when it goes into the excessively like the blue light with the white eyes, which I think is a cool visual, but at the same I think the effect is overdone in terms of stylishness. That element of subjective perspective type of storytelling was very underused. I thought he was going to explore that even further, honestly, than it actually did. Maybe go for some POV shots of like going through the beasts, like running around or whatever. Never does anything interesting with that, sadly. But yeah, no, there was just these little moments where I thought it was going to be way more, like you said, Jack, like dynamic and interesting, even on just a character level. Which to me, like, I am very much a big horror fan. I can excuse a lot of things, but when you have relatively underwhelming set pieces already, that takes you a bit kind of like, if you don't have interesting characters, I'd zone out. Like, there's nothing for me to attach myself. Like,
Mm.
I'm actually, um, I like, it's shocking. It's downright shocking. Like, I know I'm kind of like repeating myself in that sense, but it's true because we're talking about someone who first wrote freaking Saw. You watch Saw, the acting is not the best, 2004, especially coming from Leigh Whannell, but the characters are memorable. What happens in the film is memorable. You can find and attach yourself to various thematic elements, and they managed to create a very compelling franchise. For him to write this type of Wolfman, I like it's so blunt with telling you what the themes are without actually showing it. It's one of the worst instances I've seen recently of tell, don't show type of storytelling. I especially like that moment cracked me up when she's talking into the radio. Or oh no, wait, the moment when she's talking to the daughter. And she's like, Daddy, a bad relationship with the father. So I was like, we get what you're trying to say with this movie, but the actions in the film itself are not actually working. Thankfully, there are some moments that I think they don't save the movie in any way for me, but it's a very fun couple of instances. For instance, when he first starts to develop the super hearing, And he's like, "What's this noise? What's this noise?" And it's the
Mm.
tarantula in the closet at the top floor. I was like, "Oh, that's cool. That's a cool little moment, you know." But otherwise, yeah.
Not gonna lie, I had no idea what that scene was. I was so lost. I was like, what is happening? Why is there a spider? Like, this is crazy. I will say, like, this is my issue with the film, because I think there are a lot of good ideas. The issues are the payoffs are continually bad. You mentioned the dad stuff. That story pays off in like such a intentional comedic way that is like crazy, and I was just like laughing out loud in the theater because it's so awkwardly done. Garner's character is fascinating, and like I think looking at her character, it's obviously a choice that this character, this female in a horror setting, a final girl, if you want to say, she brings a very, very different energy to that performance than you would expect. It's playing against type again. And I think there's something to say there, especially with how that character still shows up at the end when she needs to, and about like what is the power within women. An interesting conversation, just portraying a very different type of woman in this situation. The payoff is bad. Like, so many of the payoffs in this film are underwhelming, which cause the ideas to get lost. I also don't think it helps that there's so much this film is trying to think about and talk about. It is not focused. There was quite a long development period for this film. I know it shot not less than a year ago, but there was like 3 or 4 years of brainstorming and thinking of the film. The filmmakers are very open that there's also this whole COVID angle. But the issue is every single idea kind of cannibalizes each other, because it doesn't work. The COVID angle doesn't work because you break the isolation at multiple points for other purposes. There's so much here that the film never really is able to find that focused story that it really should. I will also say, like, I think, though, when we go back last week, the writing in The Invisible Man is not perfect either. I think this has a lot of the same issues that Invisible Man does have. The issue is Invisible Man is far more focused in scope, and it's a way more fun ride, so you're able to go through that film and just enjoy it, as we talked about last week. I don't think Whannell is a clean writer, and like, yes, I did enjoy the Saw reference. I hope you guys also did. But like, I think that this really exposes Whannell's shortcomings as a writer. And I think that's a shame, because again, I think the ideas are really good. It just sucks that every payoff is weak.
We
Hate it.
spoke about this last week, and I think this was my main concern going into this, is that because the Invisible Man is heightened. Let's without using like the letterbox words of the day, but these are, I love the description works, but let's say he elevates the material with like how he crafts a set piece, and we talk about like, you know, the fact of he allows you to think that there's people in rooms and you think they're going to go bang, and he does it, but also that there's this subconscious element that I alluded this far better when we did Invisible Man, so go listen to that. But you know, we're predisposed to think that something's going to happen in silence in rooms of just her and nothing else. And he actually puts the big bang in a room full of people in a restaurant. He sort of did the same thing here as well. In the fact when they're going in the car and the truck and stuff, I was like, oh, you've done that as well. And there's other smaller sequences where I'm like, that's good. Especially the one where, this is the fact where I was like, oh, maybe we're onto something here. Is that when he wakes up and he's obviously not very well, and he goes down into the cellar and she's on the CB radio. There's like this shift of perspective where the lighting goes from him and goes to her. And I was like, if that's the fact, if you're trying to now move the premise or perspective, his arc is done now. We know what's going to happen. Let's go on to the reaction. I would have preferred it to just stick on her, because we know what's alluded to with what's going to happen to him. We all know what's going to happen, and I think leaving that and leaving the transition of him becoming a werewolf as well, because all these films, again, I alluded to this last week, ultimately always become defined on that. They always become defined on iconography. If you'd allowed that to take care of itself and allowed the audience to work their perception, perspective of how that happens, what perhaps even looks like, keeping it so remote from the audience, having reveals here and there, but just keep him in the shadows constantly and focus on Garner with a stronger script. I think you've got something there that's a nice little twist that takes the perspective, changes it midway through, without dislodging much of the momentum. But then no, we go back and we go forth. He shows too much. Yes, I agree. Like there's certain perspectives, like how we go into his mud, and I like the fact that he's like speaking normal, or he thinks he is, and she can't. He's like mumbling like he's had a stroke. I like that, and I like that. Like, you can just about hear his daughter, but and there's some human back there. There's all these bits and bats, but the idea was that it was going to have to be so much more compelling, and getting those pieces of set piece and sequences to a thrilling degree. And I just think it's very much lacking in certain places. I will admit that I did quite like the spider sequence. I do quite like that because it builds up to something that you think like, oh, there's again the preconceived idea of like what's going to be in the attic. What is it going to be, that dog? Like, what's it going to be? And I like that. I like that tongue in cheek shift, but I just don't think it played with it very much. When we go to we see the guy in the car and we have that build up of suspense. That's a great sequence, but it feels like, again, we're not showing enough. I don't know. It sort of showed its budget a little bit there. But it's interesting when you mentioned the Saw reference in your review, because I read your review when I was in the cinema, and I was like, what is it like? If Carson saying there's a reference here, I hope there's not a fucking puppet or a doll. And then when we got to it, I was like, oh my god, yeah, that's it. It's so blatantly it. That's quite fun. Is a director who's having like tongue in cheek fun here, I must admit, but there are that this needed to be stronger and thematic. I think it's there with how it structures itself, but again, it's too dark in the finale. There's a bit where in a finale where all the power goes out and she's got Ginger behind her and she steps back. On the left hand side, you can see someone come down the stairs, barely, and then the fact that she goes to the stairs and then she sees then there's something behind her. I think that's a continuity error, at least, because the idea that if we can see it and she goes there, we know that he's not there. We know that he's behind her. But the film plays it so straight-laced that it even itself doesn't sort of isn't wary of that. I don't know. There's a strange factor there where it just feels like it just needs another pass, which is strange considering this as a Hollywood feature. I mean, $25 million should be no excuse. Don't get me wrong, but I do think it just about secures its factor of it does look a lot better. It's not nearly as violent as I thought it was going to be. I agree with Nick. I think it needs to have a bit more body horror. That's the one thing I was like, oh, there's one pretty grotesque sequence where he starts chomping on something. I'm like, oh, but we don't get into it as much. I think it needed to be bloody. I think that disease idea that needed to be like rabid. It needed to be Cronenberg rabid. It needed to go back to the late 1970s and just go there. I'll tell you what I thought was disappointing is the use of place and setting. When we first get that sequence at the beginning, like 1995, I was like, that's a strange reason to like set it 30 years here and there. Like, why would you have done that? And then have like the native folklore or legend. I was like, oh, I'm hoping we aren't getting none of that. I was like, that's disappointing. And then because I've been to places like I've been to Oregon. I'm sure Carson has as well. Like, I've been to my wife lives in the Northwest Pacific, like in Washington State. Like, I've been to places like that, like the Twin Peaks states. Like, there's something about, like, I've been to Forks, Washington, Twilight Town. Go Forks. Like, you go there and it's very strange. Like, there's nobody there, but it's very indigenous. It's very maintained by a core group of people who go back thousands of years in that country. And I think there's interesting relationships there, and it just doesn't go anywhere near to that. Like, it's like, oh yeah, it's like, why was that involved then? Like, if you're going to make mention of that, at least give some substance to it. Like, oh, and then there's like 3 people who live there now. Like, there's an interesting thing. Like, when we get that establishing shot and we see all this farm, I think it looks absolutely gorgeous, but you don't get to see anything. We don't get to involve anything. The greenhouse, like, it's just there for 30 years. It doesn't change. You get the barn. It's like, we're in there. That's another sequence I have to come on to very briefly. This is the lack of understanding of editing in the horror game as well. And again, Leigh Whannell's a filmmaker. Please, I don't think I'm telling him how to do his job. But just think of this. There's a sequence here where we get trapped somewhere. I'll try to be very limited in spoilers. And it's just pitch black. It's one of the very few sequences where the actual pitch blackness works to this film's essence. And we see something come in, and these 2 characters are pinned in this room, and they can't see fuck all. we know something's there, but we can't see it, and neither do these characters. But for some strange fucking reason, he decides to go and cut to a POV shot, which destabilizes and takes away all suspense, all atmosphere, all tension of us being in the body of this beast, staring at these two people. And it's like, oh, the idea is that now we know that he sees them, and that's the tension. And then we cut back to a light switch, and then something happens. And I was watching, I was like, that just seems so off to me. And when I was in the car driving home, I was like, why did he need to show the perspective of the beast? If he wouldn't have shown that, and we just the tension there and the horror that comes out there is that they got out so lucky because she thought ahead, and she's but, and this is the one thing about that little character that I quite like, is that she rolls the dice and just tries to engineer this way to get out of that sequence. So she puts something on the floor, no spoilers, trying to be very limited, and something happens and they get away with the skin of the teeth. How much more compelling that is to the viewer. And then I just think he just takes that away. There's such a lack here of how these scenes are orchestrated, the payoff, like you said, Carson. Everything here seems to be like very strange with payoff. I'll leave it. I'll throw it to one of you two because I feel like I've gone forever now. But I think that sums it up. It's an interesting feature. There are some really good little bits here, but each and every time you think as an audience you're going to get some figurative, literal, or cinematic payoff, just hold your horses because it's very rudimentary. If not, I'll go to underwhelming.
It's just odd. Even the writing of the werewolf and the transformation and what that is and how that affects the guy. I mean, the tension gets so skewed when you spend so much time explicitly, I think, really humanizing that character and taking the teeth out of him in a sense where, like, yes, he has, very minor spoilers. Like, he has a lot of, there's a danger to him, right? Because he can't really control himself. But, like, he himself is not necessarily like an evil character, which takes it just makes such a murky thematic through line up until like the very end where, like, depending on how you're reading the film, it gets very odd very quickly. If you're trying to view this from like a abuse angle, it's very odd to like humanize him and portray him as being like just a guy who loves his daughter, even in the state, like he can't talk to him. Like, it's very weird. But then, like, that's also not what the film's going for. It's going for more the disease side of things, which makes the ending like big moment of violence very odd and very like read very strangely about like, should you kill, like, it's so odd, and it just has no direction, understanding of where it's going. I also will say I don't necessarily love the smaller scope of the film. I don't necessarily like that it's all in one night. I think one of the best parts of the werewolf narrative, and again, like, it's a film that you have a lot of expectations going into, and it's trying to do something different. So you have to battle with like, well, is this really a flaw of the film, or is it a flaw of my expectations? I think the strongest part of the werewolf narrative is always the fact that you transform, but then you have that moment of reflection afterwards. And that's really where the horror comes in. Lon Chaney Jr., I mentioned a million times on this podcast, gives one of my favorite performances of all time because he has to sit there with his actions and he sit there with the violence he put onto these people. That's absolutely absent here. And there's just no time for this film to breathe. There's no time for this film to sort itself out or untangle itself. It feels so restrictive and it feels so rushed and it feels so awkward in the time span that they have. There's also the sense of like, these characters know somehow that if they wait until day, they'll be fine. The guy at the beginning is like very cheekily like, you got to remember here, you don't go outside at night. And then that same guy who apparently knows there's werewolves does not calculate it correctly, so he's out at night, which feels like an insane choice in itself. There's just nothing here that's like it gets so muddy to where it's just like, it's really rough. And I think especially that is why it plays out in those payoffs, is because you keep waiting for like this film and its odd choices to unravel and make sense. And like the way that like Longlegs has a lot of weirdness, and then you do get a payoff where it's like, okay, I feel like everything was justified, everything makes sense to a point. This film does not have that, and it's a film that like, I don't know. That's why I feel like maybe on a rewatch it would fall apart, but I feel like there has to be something here. I feel like I have too much faith in my boy Leigh Whannell to where like this has to all mean something. There has to be. I have to see the vision here, but maybe it's just not, and I'm just looking at
It's
trying to find
happening now
something.
though. It's like the more I think about it, like when they get there at the truck, how does that character know they're there? Why does that character after 20 like 10, 15 years like
I'm
know
getting
that he's
lost
there?
with
Like
the names. Who's what
yeah,
character with the truck?
yeah. Why does it have to be this father son bond thing?
Oh,
Like why is that imperative to the scene? Why does it have to be a relation? Why do they have to make it personal? Like there's just it's like very scattershot. The one thing I'll be very briefly here because it's one of the things we talked about the Invisible Man about how to use social commentary and be very careful in a social society about doing things like that. The one thing he's mentioned in press, and it's quite poignant, is that before this went into pre-production, one of his and his wife, the writer's friends, had ALS, motor neuron disease, and eventually killed them. And he was like, it was difficult because during COVID, it was difficult enough. But this person who you saw before that, as an able-bodied person, just slowly reduced to nothing, like speech, able-bodiedness. Like it was just horrific. And I think there's a part of that there where you can see there's a person trying to go through grief in this film. There's a progression of writing something of like seeing someone become just ailing away to this unknown disease, uncurable disease. And I do quite find it an interesting aspect how he puts that twist onto the character. Um, and then again, granted, they're going to be out and say, "Well, you know, what you're trying to suggest that these people who have got disease are beasts." Like, no, no, no. I don't think that's the idea. That the process is the process. The werewolf process is what it is. But I think that to put that very much human quality of again having everyone gone through COVID, these diseases that happen, we don't really know what's happening. How it just slowly but surely eradicates this man's life, man or woman, whoever it was. It just like eradicates like the personality, the he is the thing that keeps this family together, and it just how that slowly just takes that away. It's quite it is quite like horrific to watch. But that's just the thematic that takes it. But that's mostly a bot really does carry that with it. Like I think that's one of the most fabulous things in that. Very poignant, very poignantly done. And I think when you get to that finale, I think it does have a bit of weight to it. But I agree with you too. It's like it just doesn't deserve like you said, Carson. How do we know? Like, there's people touching wounds in here, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, seriously. Like there's a lot like again like this is where I think I just will not work on a repeat for me because there's just so many things about logic here and within this cycle of this narrative, logic is out the window. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what to do with it. I'm fully on board with that. But there's also massive logical missteps where she's very much consciously because of the writing so one note commentating throughout this feature. She knows he's not right. She knows he's infected. Well, don't touch wounds. You've just seen your husband do something that normal people don't do with his own arm. And you don't seem to have any such response aside from just looking at the wall. Like, there's just no
yeah,
emphasis on I'll put it back to Nick, but there's just so many misgivings here. I think that the cinematic experience did it tenfold. A more personalized experience for me will just I just think it'll fall apart really well. It's tragic to see this. Actually, this is Tenet all over again. The irony, it's happening again. Yeah, I hope not, but it is falling apart in my own eyes. Like there's just the logic here is just inexcusable.
Well, before Nick goes, I like the fact that her touching that wound is not like a top 5 dumb thing she does in the film. I cannot get over it. Again, the jumping the truck, just in every way that plays out. What an insane idea! Like, could not believe it.
it's completely different from yeah. I started to wonder like, is it different in the other movies? I've never seen it done like this. Bizarre, bizarre. Um, yeah, yeah. Like I think like definitely when Leigh Whannell, and I had it already like mentioned the name before, but I do really think he watched The Fly, the David Cronenberg version of The Fly to be specific, and thought I can do that. But that movie is shorter than this, is more gruesome than this, has better character than this. It only takes 3 scenes, 2 or 3 scenes, to set up the main romantic relationship, the entire idea, or we could even say the thesis of the film in a way, is set up in the first 3 scenes, and the entirety of the movie plays out with a woman who loves this guy. Guy's a bit quirky, guy's a bit weird, guy's a bit dangerous, he has an edge, and he's slowly falling apart. It's not so much that he's transforming into a monster, but he's not becoming human anymore because of this illness. This is the main parallel that is present with Wolfman. But again, like, I didn't care. Just there was no attachment. If it weren't for just the performance of it, and again, it's shocking how much we talk about abuse, childhood abuse, potentially like alcoholic parents or whatever. It's shocking how banal and low key that entire angle is. From the prologue with the father, it's like, oh, the father is, a strict military man. That's it. Okay, okay. What about he when he grows up 30 years later? He is a good father who tells his daughter not to do some dumb shit. Okay. So where's the meta? Like, it's not the incredibly abusive boyfriend, or was it the husband? I forget, from Invisible Man. It's not that type of relationship. It's not the constant gaslighting. That's like, oh my god, this is intense. That entire angle is so downplayed. Again, it shows just confusion, I think, behind the camera when writing the script, which is a shame because I want to say something positive that came to mind a few minutes ago. Um, when you were talking about the tension, Jack, and that scene in the barn, I agree. I get why he had that POV shot, because it's like, oh, okay, from which angle the creature is going to come, because it does something similar. I think later or before, I can't remember exactly. We've also having, when you talked about, like coming down the stairs, like that sequence is almost the same as that one, of just kind of like, oh, someone's in the dark. Where are they? We don't know. They're gonna pop up out of nowhere. But I will say that at least Leigh Whannell, after years of working with James Wan, he has got a very good understanding of the jump scare and how to stretch the tension in interesting ways. And I think especially, and you mentioned it as well, Carson, I think like the first half of the film, the prologue also, like, there are so many moments where Whannell just lingers on certain shots or sets up certain angles that are not the stereotypical, like door closes, boom, the creature is behind type of shot, but it creates that same sense of anguish and fear, and just like, oh my god, something's gonna come out. And he postpones it as much as possible. I think that's something that needs to be commended in this film, because it did still manage to get a jump out of me every once in a while, and from the other audience as well. I wish there was just more of that. I wish there was just more fun in this film. It feels, whether it's the budget, just like cinematic fun, like the camera in some moments. For instance, during the one people have seen it in the trailer, like and there's a car accident, with the truck, and there's just this long shot going from the driver's seat up all around the car, re-entering the pieces. Like, okay, this is cool. You're having fun with this, all those instances, which again are also in the trailer, sadly, of the lights all going out, and just a single spotlight on Christopher Abbott casting this strong shadow in his face. It's gorgeous. But there's not enough of those moments in it.
Mm-hmm.
There's not enough body horror. There's not enough. I mean, the action, the tension, like you said, Jack. I was just like, what are we doing here? Why are you going on top of the greenhouse? What's the plan now? What's the plan? There's no plan. They're just waiting. There's no idea of like, okay, like you run this way, I'm gonna run this other way. It's like, no, just chilling, just waiting. It's fine. It's crazy. And just cherry on top. I wanted to be positive, and then I got negative again. Cherry on top. The way he gets infected, it was so confusing, because it's just, we can spoil this, I guess. It's also in the trailer, but it's just, the beast kind of like smashing the window of the car, and Christopher Abbott gets hit in the arm. And I thought, oh, those are just the glass shards. He's gonna get bit or something later on. And then it's like, no, that's the wound. Just wow, okay. Like, like you have American Werewolf in London, you have Howling. You have so many other movies that also add so much tension to the moment of the, let's say, infection, as it's called in this film, and he doesn't do much with that. Shame, just such a shame.
You mentioned the trailer for this. I think it needs to be quickly mentioned that, like, yes, I agree the jump scares are fun. Wish they were not all in the trailer. It's like a thing. I don't watch a lot of trailers, but I saw this one, and then before this, I saw the new trailer for The Monkey. And like, what is it with horror films? Maybe it's always been this way, but it feels like it's getting worse, where they just show every single kill and every single moment in these trailers. Do not watch the trailer for The Monkey if you haven't at home or on this call. I was like amazed sitting there, like, oh, that's every single thing that's going to happen in this movie. What's happening? I was shocked by that. Jak, what
It's
were you going to
always
say?
been like that,
I've,
sadly.
I've got two things to say, and the more I think about it, the more they're both pissing me off. So I'm going to be very gentle with the first one. I'm going to leave the second one up to you. I'm going to end on the question. The first thing I'm going to mention, because the more I think about this film again, it annoys me. There's a pivotal scene here between Julia Garner and Christopher Abbott where he's like basically on death's door, and she has a little monologue, and she says "I love you" to him, and it has to be the most insincere, laughable, cavalier deliverer I've ever seen. I don't think she believes even saying it, and it was that moment where I was watching it. I just thought to myself, something's just not quite right here. I was just waiting if it was going to be a narrative twist of some sorts where she didn't want him anyway, and she's like, I'm going to just take my daughter anyway. I was wondering if they were going to do something like that. No, just terribly dire delivery of a dialogue, which is just blatantly nowhere near the standard that it needs to be. But the second thing I want to ask both you questions, because I'm dying to know what Carson's going to say, because he hasn't mentioned it. We need to talk about the werewolf design here. We need to talk about the iconography. Look, it's not the Wolfman thing that premiered at the Universal theme park, but it's close. It's almost what I feel like is a first, second draft, and then they designed this one. I'd love to know the reshoots of this, because there are designs here where there's definitely an approach where this goes into rabid, fly, Cronenberg territory, and then we're going into sort of like Romero and places here, and then we definitely touch it. There's definitely Wes Craven here. There's definitely Hills of Eyes. And I think it amounts to something. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the Wolfman. I think it's close. It feels a lot more. The Cronenberg is definitely here, I think, with The Fly, but I felt it was definitely much more Wes Craven here. It so felt to me the original Hills of Eyes. Um, Again, I think it works for being very peculiar, and I think it's interesting of how it looks, and it's all prosthetics, and I quite like that. But it's not the Wolfman to me, and I think it's both positive and negative. It's positive in that it's something very much different. It works for what this is going to be. I mean, the rabid nature of just destabilizing a human being, how it erupts to something, but the transition or transformative thing I felt was quite lacking. There's like a sequence where we get some of that, where we get a bit of a body break and we go outside and we see certain things, and it pulls on certain things to break it. And granted, it's not the CGI heavy The Wolfman, which I still think is an impacting sequence alone in that, but it doesn't even come close to American Werewolf in London. Fucking hell, no, just like or even the Lon Chaney Jr. version, or even something like Dog Soldiers, or just something like more rabid, even Underworld, or something like of its nature. I'm glad it takes a risk, but it's a risk that feels again a dissonance to what the whole thing about the Wolfman is. There's very much a lack of lore, mythology, iconography, which I don't mind. I don't mind stuff like that, but it doesn't help the immersion or the idea of like, oh, it happened in 1995. Like, so has it happened before this? Why is it just this family? and then when we get to it, and there's sort of like, because the whole, it's like you said, Carson, about the fact this is only or the one day as well. I also agree with that. I don't think there feels like there's much tension in the fact of how this plays out. Yes, in the moment, first face value, surface, I think it's quite frightening. You don't know what's happening, the intensity there. But this is so lackadaisy in how it goes on. I just don't think it engages with that type of tone. It's not interested in finding that claustrophobia, that clamminess of like, oh my god, what is happening? We're in a house. What is happening to my husband? What is outside? If it played on that morals, I think you'd highlight the fact it's one day. But I think the thing where Chris Talbot, the Talbot wakes up, or even if it in either iterations, there's an understanding of like you've become a beast. You don't know what you've even done, but you've become a beast. You can taste flesh. You can taste the iron and the blood in your mouth. The realization of that you are a monster, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we get to see the transformation. We get to see this distorting of the body, this beast. But in those iterations, like this, it feels like there's a lineage there and a insight into that character of having to understand the plight. Here, not so much. It feels very much through the motions. But it's interesting, both your thoughts on the actual iconography. Were you both disappointed? Did you feel like it was worth the wait? Did you feel like they should have done something with the promotional material? How did you feel about the Universal Monster Nights? Because Carson said it was one of his favourite pieces he's seen for a long time. So I'm interested in how he got around with the film.
That was fun. The Universal Monster first design.
Oh my god.
But I was like, damn.
It was shocking. I mean, that was obviously like I would say one of the most shocking things. I didn't believe it was like, I heard about it before I saw it for Universal Nights, and then it was like atrocious. This is better than that. Thank God, right? It's hard though, because it's like the ideology behind it is the exact same thing I praise with the Invisible Man, where you're taking this universal monster and you're trying to bring them into our tangible physical world. An Invisible Man, he has a suit. They explain, oh wait, it's not just a magic, serum that makes you invisible. There's a logic there. Here, you're trying to keep it to where it's a human still, and you're trying to humanize the physical monster, not just turn him into a dog. The issue is it looks terrible. I really hate it. Like, I'm not going to be as kind as you guys, I think, are going to be, or I don't know about Nick. I'm not going to be as kind as Jack. I think it looks awful.
Hate, as in like...
I think it's awful.
Wow.
I think it's like laughably bad. The scene at the end, there's a scene at the end where he's like looking over a door and literally could not contain my laughter. It looks laughably bad, I would say.
Sorry, I'm just shocked. I didn't think you hated it this much. We haven't spoke about that. I'm please continue, because I'm fucking invested. Please.
Well, Nick, what do you think about it?
Shockingly, I liked it. I think actually, but in the sense that like it is not. That's the only thing I like about this movie. To be honest, it's just Leigh Whannell trying to reinvent, as you just mentioned, Carson. To be honest, kind of like bringing it into our modern world, our contemporary, real, tangible world. He does turn the Wolfman curse into an infection. Therefore, it makes sense that he goes for the fleshier approach to the design, for this borderline zombie, like you said, Jack, with like the Romero influence, a bit of this like mutant type look, type feeling to it. I didn't mind it. I think nowadays, especially, like the more and more movies we get every single year, the harder it becomes to make something genuinely new and innovative with creature designs, especially coming from mythology. So the idea of being like, okay, we're not going for the furry, we're not going for this actual literal wolf, but we're gonna create this just visceral human being. It's almost like, I think if this movie were called like freaking Wendigo or something like that, just like change the creature but keep the exact same movie, it could be more appealing, maybe in that sense. But because
he looks like Gollum. Like, yes, I'm sorry, like it looks
jacked up Gollum. If Gollum hit the gym,
yeah, like a taller Gollum. Like, I don't know,
taller Gollum.
Because I thought it would generally be the other way around. I thought Carson would like it a little bit more, and I thought you'd hate it, Nick. I'll say this, and this is going to come up. This is going to be a really backhanded compliment. This, I'll try to break into two parts. I like what Nick said. I like that it's distinctively different. I have no issue with that. I like the fact that it's different. It is something where it takes a different onus of something else very important to the narrative, and that then influences the character. No issue. However, like what Carson said last week, the Inside Man, the Invisible Man with Spike Lee joint, the Invisible Man. It's interesting that once you separate this from the Universal Monster paragram, like, where do then we look at certain things here? And I have to say, if you go to any Halloween store in America and you get them, there's a really famous one where they made it. Christopher Lloyd was in a movie about it. I bought a Halloween mask, like literally Michael Myers mask, a few years ago. Spirit Halloween. If they're looking for sponsorships, reach out. But you go in there and they have all the icon, they have all the Freddy Krueger stuff, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, and then in the back they have like masks, and sometimes they do the Purge stuff, they do the Universal stuff, so they have House of a Thousand Corpses, so on and so forth. I'm telling you right now, as a horror aficionado, you put the mask of this there, not one person will know what it's from. Not one person will be able to identify what genre it's from. Not one person will identify what film it's from, and not one person will identify that it's a wolf. It lacks so much sustenance and substance to the material where it comes from that it goes too far. And I think that if this was just a Wolfman separated from the Universal Monster series of Pastures New or Pastures Great, I think that you'd have a bit more success. But the fact that this is a relationship with iconography that's so dependable on each other, and that you need something so quite engaging and powerful in order to, I mean, essentially, and let's not kid around here. Yeah, this is a $25 million movie that comes out one week and be forgotten about next week. I have no problem with that. But from a Universal Monsters point of view, these things are meant to spend the next 10, 15 years on iconography and define another generation. That's the point of the Universal Monster series. In the 30s, they defined for 90 years. For 90 years, they defined a genre. One such with Frankenstein has never, and will never be touched again. You cannot do it better than James Whale did in 1931 and 33. You cannot do it better. With Dracula, there's been different iconographies, not with Nosferatu, and then you have Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman. There has been attempts, and granted, I think far better elegance and sensuality with the Dracula character. With the Wolfman, I think they've had multiple opportunities to get it right, and everyone has gone to the CGI, and it's a different. This is the weakest I've ever seen it, and it's interesting because that's the only issue where it feels like they are unfortunately connected, because these are meant to be staples of the genre. They're meant to come out and engage. I want teenagers to go watch this film and know that's that Wolfman, that's their generation's Wolfman. And I'm afraid I think it really does a disservice. I think it's nowhere near as scary. I don't think it's nowhere near as identifiable. I think it lacks such substance, and it's such a shame. I think it works for Leigh Whannell's The Wolfman that's not related, but when you compare it to the Titans and the Giants, it is incredibly disappointing.
I mean, could you imagine going to Universal Horror Nights and let's say they have a big haunted house of all the Universal monsters. You have your like Dracula section, Frankenstein, Shape of Water, and that room just kind of bores you for 2 hours with nothing to say. Like you just get bit by bit, and then you come to the Wolfman section, and it's this that jumps out at you. Like, I'm sorry, that's crazy. For me, it just feels so like holistically just so terrible. But I guess everyone feels that way. I don't know. Maybe though, again, expectations. Are we putting that expectation on the film based on this story? I don't know.
I feel like
It's like,
already the Invisible Man, like Leigh Whannell's Invisible Man, didn't have any desire or interest to even try to tackle that level of iconography. Compared to like if you think about the original, the timeless, also James Whale film. It went. I think that film is elevated by its thematic heft. This film does not have that to support it, because at least if the design were like it is now, it's not too different. Like, to be honest, it's not too different. I think about it from The Descent. I don't know if you've seen it, Carson. It's almost like those ghoulish creatures from The Descent, of
The
fleshy
Neil
and
Marshall
gooey.
thing, Nick.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
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 good
yeah.
shout.
That's the one. That's the one.
Did also did Dog Soldiers as well.
Also did Dog Soldiers 2002, I think, was before
Yeah, yeah,
Descent.
yeah.
But at least like
But I think those use the iconography way better. Like The Descent, because I think uses its iconography way stronger to where I think that holds up compared to this.
you never really feel the animalistic nature, but like
Mm-hmm.
animalistic nature in a sense of pure violence. Um, like I'm even trying to think of comparisons, but just imagine, just picture those scenes in the movie where like they're hiding on the top, like they run away and they hide on top of the freaking greenhouse, this plastic covered greenhouse. Just the creature is like randomly jumping a little bit, slashing or trying to. It's like imagine if the creature were more. Imagine the creature just tries to run up from the side and keeps slipping, and just seeing this thing just crawling on top. It's like, oh my god, oh Jesus! They are inside the house. They're taking cover. They're trying to run away from this creature. Now they're trapped, and you just keep hearing it. Just like roaming around and growling and window smashing. It's like, oh my god! And at one point, it's coming from the roof because just something. That's when it becomes. That's when you say, Carson, like there's the moments where it's standing there. It's like, yeah, I even laughed when there's like towards the end there's a moment where you get a really nice shot of one of the wolf creatures. That was just like, yeah, like, it's not great. It's okay. It's serviceable for what the film is, but it it should have been just more in the performance, in the way these creatures move, to actually sell it and potentially be like, okay, the design isn't the best, but you're actually afraid of them. It's lacking that
Yeah.
visceral nature of just like danger. It doesn't feel like a dangerous movie. And again, you can't just rely on someone loses a fingernail. It's like that's easy. That's always going to disturb people because they know the feeling of getting hurt in their fingernails.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's less a problem of iconography, I think, than just straight up what the creature is in this film. But also like they kind
Yeah.
of bleed into one another.
I mean, there's a sequence where he is standing outside and they're in the house and he's like not fully transformed, but he's definitely like physically looking weird. And she just like unlocks the door and lets him in, and it's
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's wild. It's a very funny sequence.
Just looks at
We
him
do
like, come in, okay.
Yeah, and it's like insane because again, like she never registers, and I don't, she claims she was going through the 7 stages of grief with her performance throughout this night. I don't know if I see that, Peace and Love Garner,
Oh
but like,
no, yeah.
she just never registers that this situation is insane or that like there's some danger here or some threat to her. Maybe you wouldn't let him in. To the fact that if you believe there's like a werewolf disease, you like know that's in reality now. She just never registers that like that's a shocking thing to be aware of. The movie never treats itself to where like it acts like it is super important or it's super shocking, which is just a strange choice. We do kind of have to start wrapping up, but I think like the key to these choices, to understand them, is that this film is not, again, about abuse, or it's not trying to villainize this character. Now, does the dad is there other werewolves who attack him? And like, yes, all that is there. Don't ask me how that fits into this, but this is about a genetic disease, and this is not trying to make a fun thing. This is not trying to fully villainize them to be these evil, aggressive creatures. Again, there's other wolf people who are aggressive and trying to swat them from the greenhouse. I don't know how that fits into this reading. Don't get me wrong. But I think that is something where this film consistently is like making weird choices to try to use that story, but it never fully embraces it because it wants to also be this horror jump scare movie, and those two identities don't work. The one place where I think, and Abbott's really good here, Abbott's doing his own thing, but the child actor, Matilda Firth, I think she has a really good job of selling the horror, selling the trauma here, selling the
Yes.
sadness of
Yep.
what's happening to dad. Why is he sick? I am so sad. I'm trying to humanize with him and he's gone. That is fantastic. I think that's the one place where this film really nails it. Outside of that, it just gets so lost in what it's trying to be. And the frustrating part is, again, the ideas here are interesting and they're good. And there's something to where, like, again, with what you said, Jack, as far as taking another few swings at the screenplay, maybe some reshoots, really focusing on what this film wants to be. There's something here. It just never can fully embrace that. I don't know if that's a universal thing. Maybe they saw early ideas for it and they were like, we want people to go and have more jump scares. And I don't know, maybe there's something there. I don't know. For me, it's a frustrating film because of that. I can't pass this off as being a disaster. But there are so many disastrous parts that really like I'm so torn on those.
I'll,
But maybe we can go around and give final thoughts.
Yeah,
But Jack, if
I'll
you
go
want to
next.
go.
I agree completely. I think this conversation's not done any good for my viewing purposes. I think I hate the term you got to turn your brain off to watch something. I hate that use of terminology. It's hotly appropriate with this. You look at logic here, you're just going to come out with so many questions. I think if you look at this just as like a scary bump in the night, just a one-off little thing, I think it's acceptable. I think it's absolutely fine. I'm pleasantly surprised that it's as fun as it is on occasion, but there's severe lacks of logic here. There's a severe lack of iconography. I think on sequences of blocking are like often like really strange. I think narrative levels like why is like a basement and there's like meat hooks there, and then you've got beef jerky and stuff. Like, how does that make sense if there doesn't seem to be any sort of transformation back? So why is what like what that it just makes no sense. The stuff it feels like there's two people trying to make this film. I do like a few people at the set pieces, especially like the scene perspectives in real time. That's fun. Abbott's quite good. Julie Garner, I think, is lost. I do agree. I think the kid actress is quite good. Just about with enough material. For me personally, though, the writing's on the wall. Where we've waited 15 years for a Wolfman movie within the actual namesake. Yes, there's like other stuff regarding Wales, but the Wolfman namesake. It's been 15 years before that. You know, you're looking at almost 60 years, 70 years in 44, and then you go to 2010. The fact that you've had Long Legs and Nosferatu films that have come around just around the corner with iconography and limited viewing of the public to be able to see these icons of these late icons of horror. And granted, they don't do anything particularly different with it; they just don't let you see it, and you have to go as an audience member. And those two films having amazing success with that. And granted, you know, the results will vary even on this podcast with how Nicolas Cage perhaps looks and Bill Skarsgård, but there are risks there, and I think there's an immersion where you go into that, and the result is probably worth the wait. The fact that Fangoria have not done anything about this film, the fact that Empire Magazine, Total Film, Variety have not done anything about this. This is a Wolfman feature. This is pedigree of cinema. It's upper echelon stuff, and nobody, and I mean nobody in the trades, gave a shit about your design until you did it yourself at Universal Studios Monster Night. That to me is writing on the wall. That was the biggest onus of like they've got no idea what they're doing here. They don't understand the importance of it, or they're so lax the fact that they don't understand what they've got. They're just putting it out there. That to me was the worst thing. It's not really worth the time. That being said, I think Bump in a Night horror movie. If you're going to do Hooptober and you want an hour and 40 minutes, I'd give it a shot. Still, it's a severe downtrodden piece compared to Invisible Man. But I think, as what we said last week, Carson, I think it's probably as much as we expected, and it's not like the worst thing in the world. But you spend what, an hour and 10 minutes on this, and the bus journey, the car journey, the train journey home. Just, you know, if you're not speaking about it, that might be more beneficial. Once you start talking about it, this thing just opens up a can of worms.
Nick, did we convince you that this was a good film? What are your thoughts?
No,
Final thoughts.
no. If anything, I think I dislike it even more right now. It's and that's the thing. Like I don't want to be hyperbolic. Like it's not a terrible movie. I didn't hate myself watching it. For what it is, it was serviceable. It was a fun watch at like almost a midnight screening, you know, with a full house. I like that experience of it. I do think there are some thrilling moments at first. Up until then, you just realize that Leigh Whannell is doing the same trick over and over again, and there's actually not really much of substance here. Shallow, just shallow, very disappointing. Maybe if this movie existed with a different title and had a different name attached to it, but it was the exact same movie, maybe I would have been slightly more positive to it. But considering who Leigh Whannell is, how much he has been working in this industry, how much he's been working in horror, to write something this interested and detached, like it should have been more personal. It should have felt more personal. I think it plays it way too safe. I think this is when you know, some people on the internet say like, oh, you can't talk about some things anymore, you can't show some things, like some movies are can't be made anymore. I disagree. I think, you have, we talked about Long Legs, but also I think like a movie like The Substance feel like one of those like, oh my god, yes, like we can get movies like this and people actually like it. um you watch Wolfman, and Wolfman exists in this world where you cannot offend people, you have to play it safe, you can do some things like, you want to make a movie about abuse, like show the fucking abuse. You want to have a monster as the main character, show him as such, like go full, you mentioned the name earlier, Jack, actually, like go full Jack Torrance with this. Like make me actually see that, yes, he's a father, yes, he cares about his family, but deep down, or not even that deep down, he is a true vile creature, which then works with the whole transformation angle and the disease. But then, yeah, no, just a movie that does absolutely nothing, nothing interesting with this. They showed the trailer for When Evil Lurks before this because it's coming out in Germany in a few months, in a couple of weeks. Sorry, movie that came out in 2023. People haven't watched it. Please do watch it. I was thinking about that during this, and I was like, that movie is way cheaper, way smaller crew than this, and actually manages to be scary, disturbing, thematically very dense. Leigh Whannell, what happened? I don't know. I genuinely think, give it a year, 2, 3 years, some stories will start coming out. Similarly to The Mummy, the Tom Cruise one. It's like some stories are going to start coming out about this production, and we're going to know what actually happened and why the movie is like it is. Falling in
Carson,
your park, Carson.
really quickly here. I don't. We haven't mentioned this on the podcast because I only found out this yesterday. He has mentioned Leigh Whannell in the trade. This is not confirmed. He said it's not in production, but he said that nobody's asked him to do this. But if he was going to do another one and finish a trilogy, he wants to do Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. He said, and it's interesting when you watch this and they shift perspective. There's something inside me like, ooh, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something there, but that's an interesting one because I would still be on bums and seats there, even considering this. But I believe that's the thing he wants to tackle the next 5 or 6 years, which would be interesting. But I just thought I would mention that just to get you hyped up, Carson, for another Leigh Whannell. Yeah.
That's going to be interesting.
And we'll be here. Let's be clear. Well, I'll be here reviewing that masterpiece. I think that's like the funniest part of this, or maybe the most contradictory part of this, is like, I agree this film has a lot of flaws. Obviously, I think we've all established that. But like, I am really still locked in on like Leigh Whannell as a director because I see past the bad screenplay. Again, an Invisible Man had a bad screenplay, and I see those choices as a director, and I'm like, no, there's something here that's fun and something worthwhile to where like I'm still on the train of pro Leigh Whannell. We'll see what he does with his career from this point on. But if you want to join that journey, you can see Wolfman in theaters. If we've convinced you, I hope we have. Before we go on to our question of the week and everything, did want to take a little bit of a moment and a breath here to hold space for the passing of David Lynch. We just finished our David Lynch December. I was in LA and the news broke that he died, which is obviously super unfortunate. And it was weird because it felt like everyone really took a moment to appreciate him and really share their favorite memories and like really talk about him. So I just want to give the floor to us very quickly. If we want to go around and just say anything we want to say about David Lynch, his career, his passing. Nick, I know you are the David Lynch stan here. So maybe if you want to go first, do you have anything you would like to say about David Lynch?
Yeah, just it was devastating, genuinely devastating news. I feel I'm like the resident David Lynch guy here at Clapper. But I realized even in many people's lives, it's never happened to me before where like I was just cooking dinner, I was ready to watch a movie, and that's when I read the news. I just saw someone post like Lynch picture on my phone. I was like, oh fuck, oh no, just tell me it's a new movie, tell me it's like something good. And I was like, no, it isn't. um and it just like completely took the wind out of me during that entire evening. And I started getting messages from friends checking in on me, which is something that I found to be incredibly touching, but also something very universal because it made me think about other people that I know who love Lynch, that I bonded over because of Lynch. So many friendships were born because we all both shared the love of this legendary director. I've talked about him endlessly, so I won't go on for too long. I just, I love him. He meant the world to me. He means the world to me. It's because of him and his works that I ended up starting making films myself, and I will continue on just remembering him through his life's work, all of his paintings, all of his music. Like, there's so much more than just cinema to appreciate of what he did. Transcendental meditation, I can take or leave it. It's potentially questionable, thorny territory, but otherwise, no. I'm very happy that everyone came together because of that. I ended up spending my evening just having Fire Walk with Me playing in the background while reading up texts and messaging people, and he will be missed. He will be missed.
Jack?
Yeah, this one was strange. I think with a lot of people, you can sort of accept when these sort of things happen in terms of age. But this came about in another string, like you said, Nick. I remember you posted on the Slack group chat, Carson, and I read it. I was like, "Are you fucking?" I generally I was like, "Is this a fucking joke?" Like 78, like because he announced he was ill, and then but that was 6, 7, 8 months ago, and I was like, "Is this a fucking joke?" It's like, "No, it's on it's on like X," and I went on it. I was like, "Jesus Christ!" And it's same like Nick said. Like my wife messaged me and was like, "Oh, talking about," because it was just so strange because I'm not the biggest fan of David Lynch, but in the last few days, thinking about this, like it sort of dawned on me how impacted I've been on his filmography. And granted, if you watch or listen to the Inland Empire, you probably don't get that point of view, like because I don't really like his experimental work, but nevertheless, like his work to me is like with Eraserhead. I remember watching that when I was 16 but in England, there's not very much outreach for being in a film community. I live in a small town in north of England. There isn't very much the availability there. Letterboxd wasn't a thing. IMDb forums were, but they were, as a 16-year-old, what do you really do? And I remember doing a media course in film, and we did Del Toro's. It wasn't Del Toro who produced it, but it was The Orphanage with Jay Bayona, I think. And then when I went to college when I was about 16, 17, one of his tutors was ill. I think I've spoken about this story anyway. And a guy came in, and he was an experimental filmmaker, and he screened Eraserhead for us. And I remember, you got to remember, I'm there with 30 other people, and there's about 29, 28 people in that course who don't really want to do film. They're just there because it's credits and, media, let's do some media. Because you don't want to know what you're doing when you're 16, 17. I was there because I wanted to make films. I was there because I wanted to be a filmmaker, because I adored films. I want to write about them, talk about them. I remember just sat there and being mesmerised about it. And the whole thing he just asked us is, what do you think it's about? And I had no idea who David Lynch was at this point. I remember just being like, it's about the nuclear family. It's about like nuclear war. Like he's so scared of it. And I remember he was like, no. I was like, what do you mean no? And he was like, it's about that he's scared to be a dad. We did a bit of research on. Obviously, because he had a baby daughter, and he was frightened to death of being a father. And I was like, it was just like very thought provoking. And then I watched a few bits and pieces in between. I won't be able to tell you what, but then I watched The Elephant Man for the first time before I ever went to America at 3 o'clock in the morning. Before I got a train to Bristol with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And and then I watched Lost Highway when at 3 o'clock in the morning at university with my friends, and then Mulholland Drive and stuff like that. And it's interesting that these films pop up at a certain time for me in my life. Pivotal in my creative output of like understanding film. And I've never really given David Lynch his flowers. I've always enjoyed his work. I think The Elephant Man's extraordinary. I really do. Like he could do anything. I don't like Dune and I don't like Inland Empire, but like Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, like Twin Peaks, like there's an output there, and I think I agree with that. Not to get like soppy about it, but I agree with Nick, and I said this before the podcast. There was a moment on X, even on Letterboxd, just for like maybe 24 hours, where collectively there wasn't one person that didn't give their ode and homage to him as a great filmmaker. And there's all these stories, all these like his interviews and stuff like that, and it was actually kind of like heartbreaking and touching to see that like a filmmaker of such little to say in opinion, yet not in exploration, experiment through his films, affected so many people in their lives. It was quite extraordinary to see the feedback. It'll always be a shame that he was never alive to have seen that. Granted, he will have had other plaudits in his life, don't get me wrong, but to have had that day, I think his children would have been mesmerised by it. I think his close friends, how there's how a lot of his frequent workers, co-stars and stuff like that would have been mesmerised. I truly thought it was a touching little day. It was just one of the nice reprieves in life where it was like just such a warm thing, and then we go back to the fucking brutalist using AI. It's, oh god, it's everywhere. It was just nice for 24 hours to be like he touched someone's lives, and I always want to reach out to Nick, like one of many people. Like it's tough. 78, and I'm not. Granted, he had illnesses, but 78 is generally no age. Like the guy had like to lead 10, 15 more years. You know, it's tough. It's tragic, especially with just. I mean, we don't really know if it's the fires or what. It was just it was tragic, and I just can't stop thinking about Lost Highway last few days. Like I can't. I need to watch a straight story. That's my last one, and I've got a Razorhead on 35mm scan. I might watch that as well, but it's tough. It's tough, but that those pieces of work are so seminal. They'll live forever, and he is the last of his kind. Like it is that much of like it's truly a beast. Like it's the last of its kind, and it was poignant, very profound. And I think, yeah, I'll let you go on, Carson. I'm going on now, but yeah, it was tragic.
The Straight Story is like such an insane last film to have watched from him. Now after this, like I don't know, that's going to be an experience. I had a very weird week leading into Lynch's stuff. Obviously LA was on fire, and that was very scary because thinking of all my friends, and then my mom had a big health scare, which also made Wolfman very weird. So then I went to LA, which was also then just like a weird vibe, because like it's LA, but there's also all this fire stuff. So like there's grief, and it was just odd. And then David Lynch passes, and also like he's so in love with LA, and so much of his career and life is dedicated to that city. So to be in that was very like weird during it all. But yeah, I mean, it was really, really obviously touching, and just like a really big weight. I felt like I didn't expect the weight to feel as big as it did, and it really made me I had like a really profound, I feel like, emotion when we finished the Jean Couture series, Nick, because I was like, wow, it's really weird to internalize or digest that like this filmography we've seen everything of. Like this guy is dead, he's no longer making any projects, this is his work. And that's very odd. And it was a similar thing. Obviously, John Waters is alive, and hopefully making more projects, but it was very weird to finish his filmography and be like, that's it. I've seen all the John Waters films. Like there's no more for the rest of my life unless he makes something new, like exploration, to have that moment of sitting down and experiencing that for the first time. Very similar in December with Lynch when I caught up with his features. And I know he has Twin Peaks and he has other shows. And as you mentioned, a wide array of artistic pieces outside of anything being filmed. But it was very weird to digest that and be like, oh, I've seen every David Lynch film. And then this news, it really hits you hard. And it makes me think of like, there's so many directors and filmmakers and just people in general who like are getting up there in age. And I think about the love we've shown on this podcast to like John Waters or Ridley Scott, or these people, Paul Schrader. And it's like, you always, I guess, feel like it's just, I don't know, it really made me think about death, and made me think about death with filmography and with art. Even with like Inland Empire, we talked about the power of capturing something on screen and that will live forever past death. And it was just really like, I don't know, it was just a profound, like, emotional way. It really was unlike anything I've experienced, and it just really hit me. So, obviously, rip David Lynch, one of the greatest to ever do it. To celebrate David Lynch a bit, for our question of the week, we're going to talk about our favorite performances in a David Lynch project. Jack, I'll send it over to you first. What is a performance that really stood out to you?
There's always it's just such a touchy one, because like there's the right answer here. There are the right answers, and then there's also the niche ones. I'm I'm gonna give the right answer. I'm gonna give a niche one if that's fair, because but Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet is just some on a different level of like how that man was directed, how that conversation goes on set, how they got away with that, how they had chats about conceiving that character is genuinely like yeah, I just can't see a very mild mannered director dealing with a Dennis Hopper in that era to be as exquisite as it was. That to me is like it's just unquestionable. What another? This is tough. There's. I'll say I think Nicolas Cage and Wild at Heart is another one, because it's another one. How do you restrain Nicolas Cage? I don't know how we managed to do that, but it works. But I think generally the answer here is probably is it Kyle MacLachlan? Is that how he pronounced his last name? I generally I think the Twin Peaks character of I just think
Dale
that's my
Cooper.
favorite performance. I just think it's so like light-hearted. I think it just encompasses like the value of like just trying to do the right thing, and then and then you have the readings of it, and about how he puts everyone in danger and trying to just do the right thing, and that weird sensibility of what a David Lynch film progresses. It's John Hurt in the Elephant Man. Like it's John Hurt in the Elephant Man. Like it is the one of the most finest performances ever. It's like it's not John Hurt. It is the Elephant Man. Like it's just something different. It is in a different ballpark. It is not on the same level of any contemporary of its time. It is the most emotionally draining, emotionally damaging, and exquisite look at trauma, perspective, society, culture, loneliness. It is the embodiment of what it means to be a human being on both sides of being the antagonist and protagonist. It is a debilitating film to watch, and that central performance there is absolutely astonishing. I must have given you about
Nick?
9 there. Sorry, but John Hurt.
No, it's a great list. Nick, what performances stood out to you?
I could get honestly lost even more so than Jack did in just listing out some performances that I love. But I only wanted to save two, honestly. Isabella Rossellini in Blue Velvet, the sensuality, the vulnerability, seduction, and fear. It's just, I loved it. That's the moment I fell in love with Lynch's filmography, and I fell in love with her as well. Love that performance. But the second one is actually been a long time collaborator for him, but my favorite performance of his in any of Lynch's projects. The performance of Harry Dean Stanton in Twin Peaks: The Return. The character already appeared in Fire Walk with Me, but it was expanded upon in The Return. And I think there's something so poignant in all of these scenes. Again, similar to what you were talking about, Carson, with Lynch's own death and look at death. Catherine Coulson in that show as well. She gets an absolutely heartbreaking final scene. But everything Stanton, there's just such a level of humanity to him, usually speaking, to be honest, but especially in Twin Peaks: The Return. Without getting into spoilers, but you'll see when you get there, Carson. But he has some of my favorite moments, and it's also one of his last performances before he passed away. There's a lot of grief, I think, nowadays. As the years go on, there's more and more death present in Twin Peaks. And I love that all of these performances have become just immortal thanks to these projects.
Absolutely. I think that one of the most overlooked parts of David Lynch's career is continually the performances he gets and he films and he creates. You can tell in any interview with anyone who worked with him or any behind the scenes footage, the passion and love he has for actors is really like remarkable. It's like, it is really remarkable. I'll mention Richard Farnsworth in Straight Story is fantastic. But I'm going to also mention Wild at Heart. Jack, you stole Nicolas Cage. I'll also mention Laura Dern there. I love that film. I think it's one of Lynch's best films. And those two performances, I think it's the greatest performance Nicolas Cage has probably ever given. Laura Dern has like, just in Lynch's filmography, has just like nailed it. But yeah, I'll mention those. But Richard Farnsworth also in The Straight Story. Ooh, fantastic. And you want to talk about grief on screen, and you want to talk about conceptualizing a life lived. I think that film in general is, again, it would be an experience to revisit right now. And Jak, I cannot wait eventually to hear your thoughts on it. But also, I feel like I started Twin Peaks, for example, and I feel like it's hard for me to say I want to like continue because it's really good, but also I just want to like savor that, and I want to savor this experience. So, I would not blame you if you held on to that film for a while on the watch list, because what a little treat you get to have there. With that, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about? Nick, what have you seen this week? You are muted, by the way.
Classic. Very quickly, recently I watched The Trial by Orson Welles. Great Kafka adaptation, just gorgeously shot. The production design is insane. I watched We Live in Time, a funnier movie than I thought it would be. Um, Also less melodramatic. It's more melodramatic in a bad way than it is in a good way. I love my melodrama, and I think this one gets a bit too cute for its own good. And also just the fucking weirdest editing narratively that I've ever seen in a film. I'm just like, why are you putting these scenes together? It's all non-linear, baffling film. I did also watch two of the biggest foreign language films from the 2024 award season, The Seed of the Sacred Fig and All We Imagine Is Light, both in the cinema, thank God. I thought All We Imagine Is Light was very beautiful, a very sensual film, magical in a way that I was not expecting. So also a little bit too slow for my taste. It took a while to get going. There's a lot of arpeggiato and acetatul in it. Um, but Seed of the Sacred Fig I loved. A slow burn, 3 hour movie. It's like, okay, we're gonna stay with this family for a long time. But I think the way the characters are set up, the way the world of Iran is set up, I think it's impossible to leave that film without having a clear understanding of what is going on there, what went on there a couple of years ago, and it's just thrilling from beginning to end. And lastly, I managed to watch Showgirls in the cinema with a crowd. My third time viewing the movie. It's officially a 5 star banger. I absolutely love this film. It's so much fun, and also it manages to get very serious and almost thoughtful at the end. And lastly, just today, I watched A Real Pain, Jesse Eisenberg film, and I really liked it. I thought it was very funny and delicate. I love how it explores not generational trauma, just pain, just like inner pain. The way we relate to people, the way people influence us, the way we can hate someone and also want to be them, and that's probably why we hate them. It's a very complex film, and I think Kieran Culkin's character is way more likable than I was led to believe, way more genuine and raw and just passionate. And I've known people like that, and it kind of broke my heart a little bit in the end. I love that film. And yeah, those are my movies of the past week. Good week.
Jak, what have you seen this week?
Mine's gonna be quite anticlimactic, but quite interesting. I've watched only two in two very different type of tones. I'll start with the lesser interesting one, but still interesting. I watched Kevin Smith's new movie, the 4:30 movie, because it was 88 minutes, and I don't mind some Kevin Smith stuff. And I didn't really know what to expect, and I quite liked it. It's a very much like in the middle type of feature. It feels very much more akin to something like Richard Linklater would do, but more with sort of the tone of a Kevin Smith film. It was quite emotive, uh, quite poignant on occasion, just full of like those things about being a kid with your friends and finding first love, and how it incorporated movies and stuff with a Kevin Smith shtick. It was a compelling time, fun enough. There's some strange casting choices and the type of humor. I think for for a Kevin Smith fan, I think you'll enjoy it. But other than that, I think it just does what it needs to do. But it's definitely like a 3 star middle of the road. The other film, however, I watched was Wicked. um, yeah, I'm not a musical fan, and it takes me a lot to get into this stuff. I won't go actively seeking it out. I mean, I watched Hamilton for the podcast, and we did it, and that's going back ages ago, and I quite like that as well. But I like the historical aspect of it. I like the avant-garde nature to it. Dare I say, I like the idea of how that thing is elevated with the material in itself. Wonder what ever happened to Lin-Manuel Miranda, because I don't know. But I went into Wicked fearing the worst. 2 hours and 42 minutes scared me to death, and I came out of it and I enjoyed it. I was going to say I was pleasantly surprised. I enjoyed it. Where do you even start with Wicked? I'll say this. I think Ariana Grande surprised me. I think she's actually really quite quippy. I think she's got a lot of charisma and she's quite energetic. I think she feeds to that role. She's not wooden whatsoever. She brings so much to that role. I think their dynamic is quite interesting. I think it's a little bit too sweet and sickly for its own good. However, about that, I don't really like the musical notes. There's the popular thing that I've heard before, but nothing else stood the test of time for me. Everything else was like, oh, we're into a musical segment. I think how the blocking is on those sequences are not very engaging. I don't think they're very much brash. I don't think they work at all for me. I think if you're going to go into a musical number, I think it should be absolutely hysterics. I think it should just be outlandish, brash. I think it should just be full on foot. And to me, I just don't think it is. The narrative in itself, though, I thought was engaging. But that stuff, I really like the iconography here. I think there's something really interesting about it. I have been taking notice, though, of a lot of people about the composition, particularly about the colour grading. And I think if you want to read into it as a film nerd here, and this is to the nerds out there, you could argue that the composition and colour grading is so mute, considering the thematics of that underbelly of the narrative, what's happening. You could infer that the world has been drained of its colour and its boisterousness, so should I say, because of what's happening. However, I do think it's muted too much on occasion. Nothing pops here. I think its opening looks quite cool with the how it leads into essentially like retelling of the Wizard of Oz story. I quite like the opening. I think the iconography here, when it's practical, when there's a physicality here, there's a texture, I think it's quite fun. But then as soon as you have that water and you have the witch's hat, and we go up to this fucking CGI monstrosity. And it's same with the finale as well. There's just too much CGI bullshit in here for it to have a bit of a connection with me. But I was pleasantly surprised. I thought I was going to hate it, and I thought it was fine. But I'll say something now. That running time felt like fucking 3 days long. It does not need to be that long. And then there's a part 2. Please. But that was it this week.
I'll go quickly. After Wolfman, it was still kind of early, but I just wanted something dark, so I revisited Oz Perkins, Gretel and Hansel. Before our podcast that's going to be on the Monkey next month, I want to rewatch or watch, depending on the film, all of his earlier work before Longlegs. Talk about a film that just came out like 5 years too early. If this film released now, it's fantastic. I mean, it's dark. It really takes this narrative, and I think elevates it with really strong characters, a really strong style. This is a film that really, really impressed me on a rewatch. I just wish it came out any other time than like January 2020, because people were not ready for the film then. Before we review Weathering with You in a couple weeks for my birthday, I'm watching the Makoto Shinkai films I haven't seen. I watched 5 centimeters per second. It was boring. It was bad. The joke is that I hate Makoto Shinkai as a filmmaker outside of Weathering with You, which is like one of the greatest films ever made. So that's the fuck of it all with him. You go into every film and you're like, maybe this has some of the magic, and it never does. It never has the magic again. So that's a shame. I finally watched It Ends With Us. Oh God, it was awful. I mean, awful film. A lot of drama on that one I won't touch on, but like very interesting work. Confess Fletch was very fun. The Country Bears was shocking. I would recommend you watch it. It's awful. It's terrible, but like, wow, what an experience. I finally watched the original I Know What You Did Last Summer. It was fun, but the mystery is very convoluted and did not necessarily come together. And then finally I watched Guy Ritchie's The Covenant. Really shocked me. I don't really like a lot of military films. I think that's a narrative in a world and a space I'm not really a big fan of. But this was quite strong, quite intense, quite emotional, good character work. The one issue is that Jake Gyllenhaal in the field feels so out of place. It's like shockingly bad how his persona, as he has to be this military guy running around the Middle East, he seems crazy. Any scene that's not him out trying to be like the strong military guy shooting guns, it's fine, but Jake Gyllenhaal just is miscast there. So a weird week, but kind of reflects my life. So I think that is fine. With that, thank you so much for listening. Where can we find everyone on the internet? Nick?
You can find me on Blue Sky and Instagram at NickGar97, and there you can find links to everything, including my short films on YouTube and Vimeo, and also links to my podcast, Anatomy of an Adaptation.
Jak?
You can find me on Twitter and X, which I'm barely on, but I'm just sending memes to Carson at this point. Maybe Jakob, if he's watching and listening. You can find me on Twitter and X with the username at Jak-Luke Sharp, and you can find me on Letterboxd. I'm just about finishing my November. I've got 2 more things to log, and I've got my Decembers I'm currently logging, and then obviously I'm doing my Januaries as well. I'm doing Black History Month for February, Women's International Month for March, so some great films there of a multitude of different levels, documentary, fiction, all sorts, just tackling other subjects. So it's going to be interesting for your months. You can find me on there with the same username at Jak-Luke Sharp. You can find the Joker feature that's coming out, hopefully getting edited this week. It's an absolute beast, I've been told by the editors. And then my Gladiator 2 review is coming out tomorrow morning, and you just have to wait and read it, I'm sure. But thank you very much for having me on, Cass. This has been a blast. We've waited 4 years in the making to do this, multiple iterations to do the Wolfman, and it's finally come to pass. Maybe one of the very few that we've touched on in the news that have actually come out. So what a poignant moment. And we also did Hansel and Gretel as well, I'm sure. I think we did the review when that came out. Did we not?
No, it was before ClapperCast time, same year, but probably reviewed it for the site, I assume. But
yeah, 4 years on. Wow. But what a pleasure to come back, and a poignant week, but one couldn't have been best in with spending some time with you two. So thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
My favorite thing about Twitter, I don't post on it or use it outside of our DMs. My favorite thing is Jakob sees all the memes and everything we send, but never responds to me. Yeah. He just like looks and is just like next, which always brings joy to my heart in a weird way. You can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week as we start my 2-week birthday celebration, starting with Paul Schrader's First Reformed. I'm very excited to talk about the film. A film it feels like we've talked about a lot, but we haven't really. So I'm excited to break into it, especially because I know Nick is a hater, at least in my first viewing. So we'll get there when we get there. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.